Greetings. Happy day 9 of our meditation challenge. I can't believe it's almost over. Today's Thursday. I'm sorry for the late video today. I had a little disruption. I had to drop a car off for an oil change, and I was out of my habit loop. I didn't sit right away, so I didn't do this video first thing. So anyway, here we are. This is a really challenging topic today, and I want to talk about forgiveness and how we forgive in difficult situations. A year ago, I had sort of a heartbreaking fallout with a very dear friend of mine, somebody who'd been my friend for 22 years. And quite frankly, I hadn't really experienced anything like this. I've been very lucky with my, family and friends have had pretty good and healthy, stable relationships for a long time. This particular person did something that was really hurtful and unfortunately ended the friendship. And for several weeks, I was plagued by my anger. I'd be in the grocery store shopping around after the workday, brewing on angry rants that I wanted to unleash on this person. I found myself waking up from dreams, nightmares, where I had to encounter him, and I didn't even want to be in the same room as him. Really, I don't know how much you know about me, but not typical for me. I'm not a very angry person. And I was reminded by a friend of a quote that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about our own happiness. I had to find a way of letting go of this hurt, of this anger, of this depression, so I could move on and my life could be better. A few things I want to talk about when it comes to forgiveness. Just because we're working on forgiving somebody doesn't mean we're going to do anything other than maintain healthy and appropriate boundaries. Some people shouldn't be back in our life. If you've been in an abusive relationship and that is not a safe person to have around you, just because we're forgiving them and we're working on letting go of anger does not mean we're going to welcome that person back into our life. Sometimes forgiveness, removing this anger, does allow somebody back into our life. Talked a little bit in the loving kindness meditation, the example I had of the coworker where I was really in the wrong. And once I removed that anger, we were able to find some healing in that relationship. So you really got to trust your intuition. Please, if you're not sure if this is a safe or healthy person, try to seek some counsel of an experienced person, a dear friend, somebody who can look at the situation objectively, a therapist, a spiritual guide, somebody who can help you discern if it's appropriate. I think there's two aspects to when I have had to work on forgiveness that I've found helpful. The first is perspective. Emotions have this interesting quality of usually over time of finding some healing. And when I'm frustrated about something, especially small stuff, kind of like the little pebbles in the course of the day, not the big stuff like the falling out I had with a lifelong friend, sometimes just asking myself, how am I going to feel about this in a year? How am I going to feel about this in 10 years? When I'm on my deathbed one day, will I be recalling and replaying this particular hurt? The answer is almost always no, right? When we put this in the perspective of our whole of our life, usually most of these things don't rise to the level of being worth still thinking about 10 years later. Every once in a while, however, they do. Falling out of a best friend of 22 years, it's something that, even 2 years later now, I really feel the loss of that relationship. And I suspect, 10 years from now, probably they'll, be fully healed. They probably won't care as much, but I suspect there'll still be a sense of loss and grief. And this is when I turn to this second aspect of forgiveness, which is trying to remember the person's humanity. I know part of what caused this hardship, this break, this rupture between me and my friend was not his fault. He was, struggling with a lot of stuff. This wasn't something he did at me, right? This is something that happened that was tied to a mess going on in his life at the time. And when I think about that, when I try to remember the individual's birth and aging, and that they've loved and fallen out of love and had heartbreak and loss and triumphs and successes and failures just like everybody else. It starts to remind me of their humanity and makes it a little bit easier to put myself in their own shoes. And remembering that most people don't do things at us, right? Hurt people hurt people. We know so much about cycles of abuse and sorrow. We tend to hand these things down multi-generationally. And we hurt people even when we don't want to. And it's usually a sign of our individual brokenness, not a critique or an attack on the other person. I really use loving kindness really actively in this space. So I try to put something in perspective, ask myself how I'm going to feel about it in a bigger timeline. I try to remind myself of the humanity. And when I'm struggling with that humanity, that's where I interject these loving kindness meditations that we talked about yesterday. You can go back to. I think the last thing that really the final step in forgiveness is looking at what my part in this situation is. Sometimes it's as simple as recognizing that I did something that made the situation worse, that compounded it. Maybe I am partially or equally, or maybe sometimes even more at fault in this situation. Sometimes it's a question of expectations. I see this a lot with hurt feelings around relationships with parents, for example, or siblings or kids. We have this expectation, this desire that that person's going to achieve some ideal, and they fall short of that. And so it's not even so much that they did something at us, it's just that we had this imagined sort of threshold that we wanted them to cross, and they didn't live up to that. So sometimes, my part in hurt where I need to work on forgiveness is because my expectations misaligned with what that person was capable of at the time. I get the question often when we talk about forgiveness as an exercise in the context of a meditation practice. What about something that's objectively not my fault at all? Victim of a crime, childhood abuse, any of these situations where there would be absolutely no way of finding fault with the person who has been wronged. In those situations, when we're still working and struggling with forgiveness, there's this question for me of, have I taken ownership over how I feel and how I'm reacting, and am I doing the work to get better? So if I've experienced a childhood trauma, am I going to therapy? Am I trying to deal with this in a healthy way? Am I pursuing healing and recovery? And so not responsible for the original action, not responsible for obviously having hurt feelings and anger and trauma afterwards, but rather responsible for taking ownership over my life and saying, but I want to be free of this this anger. I want to be able to be happy. And that's where we start to reclaim some ownership over these things. So it's a challenging topic, but I think it's a really valuable one. Letting go of anger has freed up a lot of emotional bandwidth for myself and definitely improved the quality of my life. Okay, let's do our 3 minutes of meditation together. Okay. Thank you guys. One day left in our challenge. I hope your practice is continuing to go strong. Have a wonderful day.